Paul Tillich was a theologian, someone I spent a lot of time actually reading. And in 1963, he was on the cover of Time magazine and invited to speak at the 40th anniversary celebration of the magazine. And what he said in his speech was that he saw the United States as a nation that was a free society, to be sure, but the one without depth. Its ceaseless expansion, whether into outer space or on the production line, had created an almost irresistible temptation to produce. For the sake of producing, and he called the United States to come to a halt in order to enter creation and unite with its power. Interesting thing. And it's an interesting thing to think about today, because what at least one thing Jesus is calling us to be about is a direct, gradual entry into the deep things of life. He wants us to come away from lives, those aspects of our lives that are superficial. Because when we don't do that work of seeking the depth and cultivating it, we're giving our second best to the world. And the world needs much more than that. So today I want to talk about that a little bit in the sense of where it is that we begin and where it is that we may end up as we try to pursue this type of a path a bit more. As we think about how, having tried to do so up to this point, we might tailor it to our time and to our particular needs as individuals and as people. And more than that, tailor to who we are. God doesn't call us to be people that we're not built to be. God doesn't call us to be faithful in areas in which we're not gifted to be faithful. But we are all blessed with ways in which to serve God. So our relationship with God really is a starting point. Knowing that God is one who has our best interest in us, and our best interest in mind. And at their best, the ancient people of Israel knew this. They understood it very well. Think about how they were describing themselves and how Moses was led to teach them in the book of Deuteronomy. Thinking themselves as wandering Arameans, so people without really any solid location geographically to live in. And taking that long detour into Egypt at a time in which they were seeking simply to survive. But over the generations, then landing at a point in their history in which they were being oppressed by an enslaving Pharaoh. So an emperor, a ruler who was oppressive. And then from there, being led by Moses to be able to find a place where they gained identity in a spot promised to them by God. So here we have this call to remember that fact in Deuteronomy 26. And then more than that, to begin a ritual in which the very first fruits of the land would be given and commemorated to God. And then also every third year to give a tenth of what they were able to produce as a recognition, a thank offering to Almighty God. And what it is giving a regular reminder to themselves that they were dependent people. That there was a time in their history, and there would be other times in their history, that they were and would be vulnerable people. And so it's not an accident that the end of that passage that we read today from Deuteronomy has this concern for the alien, that is the resident immigrant that is there. The poor, the widow, and if you add the verses afterwards, people of that sort of vulnerability in the society were present in the passage there. Remember your vulnerability. Be sensitive to those who are vulnerable around you. And when they were faithful, they remembered God's grace and lifted up. And what they were doing, I would suggest to you, by doing that, is rooting their lives in God and their relationship to Almighty God. They were being radicals. You might think that's strange that I would say that. But it's always important to distinguish between radicals and reactionaries. Reactionaries are simply people that ping off the circumstances of life and give almost repeatedly a superficial response to the stimulus that they're responding to. A radical is rooted. It's technically what the word means. It's so deeply committed to something, so deeply driven by a value system, by a way of believing, that your life is lived out in it. Think of trees and roots. How does that tree have life? When I water my plants in my classroom that demand to be watered, and that I'm relatively good at lately responding to, I know I'm helping their roots to take in moisture that they need to survive. The radical life is the rooted life. And that's what God is calling us to be about here today. But we forget. We forget just as the ancient people did. If you look at the testimony of the scriptures to the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, some of them repetitionally so, you'll see that there's weaving together of the faithful monarchs and the unfaithful ones. And sorry, the numbers aren't good in terms of who wins or who has the greater numbers. And there's this numbering of kings that were less faithful than those who were, a much greater number that were less faithful than those that were. And all it is doing is indicating the regular temptation of people in power. We get frustrated with our leaders sometimes, but many of us don't consider what sort of temptation these people are facing, that they have to have strong characters to respond to. And history attests that it's a tough struggle. It's a tough struggle to be having access to decisions and wealth sometimes that you can benefit from, and at the same time make the right decision on behalf of the nation. So it's our responsibility, quite honestly, not to be judgmental towards our leaders, but to call our leaders to account, to be responsible in the power that they use. The Bible teaches Christians nothing about protecting political and economic interests. That's the path of selfishness. It says everything, though, about standards of justice and self-giving love that we're supposed to live out personally in our communities, but also to call our leaders account for that. And it's a matter, again, of regularly assessing what's going on inside of us. You know, it can be really, really basic. I eventually decided that I did not want to make my career based on a reed that was 71 millimeters long. That was composed of cane that was 1/4 of an inch wide and about an inch and a half long on the top of that tube. And more than that I was not willing to build my life, that's an oboe reed is what I was discussing or describing for you. I also wasn't willing to depend upon the springs and some of the leaks that could happen in that instrument. I mean, there was the instrument I bought, the top of the line, a Moray oboe, and you bought it knowing that it was going to crack within the first year. You just knew it. They all do. I don't know why that's the case, but they all do. And you just waited for that to happen and then get them repaired. But there's a sense in which that's just a little example of how the brokenness that creation can have and being aware of the weaknesses. We need that. The depth work allows us to do that, to look at ourselves within. I was a student in pastoral care during seminary when I saw the one and only time, I believe, that I was in a theater and watching a surgery take place. And I'd never, ever seen the inside of a person. And it's all there for us. If we're living beings, we have to have all these organs and so forth that make us who we are, that we rarely think about. Getting my kids to do mindfulness in Marshall, to actually listen to their breathing without trying to control it, and also listen for the pumping of their heart. It's there. We're rarely aware of it. Do we tend to the inner things? One of our great generals really questioned this, even near the end of his life, General Omar Bradley. Shortly after he actually retired from active duty, he summarized the generation at the time. He said, we have too many people of science and too few people of God. We grasp the mystery of the atom and reject the Sermon on the Mount. The world has achieved brilliance without wisdom, power without conscience. Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. He was indicting us. It was a similar indictment that Tillich was giving. Because we just tend to want to cruise along. What one writer talks about, live on automaticity. We just stay on automatic, cruise patrol, cruise through life, and don't take enough time to stop and look at the inward person. So the temptations of Jesus are a great place for us to think about that. Jesus, it's very interesting to compare the words of Jesus in Luke over against Matthew, because Matthew is a slightly different order. He flips the second and third temptations. And I sort of wonder what Luke's agenda is here, because Luke, interestingly gets us to basically the stages of our relationship to God. He first of all deals with the bread, and then he turns to the risk of worshiping Satan and in order to gain political power. And then he turns to, okay, you get your relationship to God, you get your mind around that, but then just the concern for how we can try to toy with God and how that can be a dangerous thing. So I want to briefly just look at that. It's interesting when Jesus is teaching about one does not live by bread alone. He's trying to get us to understand that we're something more deep than simply physical people. Now the deal is this: sometimes we try to separate the physical and the intellectual and the physical and the spiritual. That's not biblical. And certainly within the scriptures, we have these woven together, and they're interacting all the time, and they build on one another. They can help one another be stronger or weaker. So it's not as if the physical is not important, but it's not the only thing. And so what does it mean for us to tend these things that are so interconnected with one another? Basically, Jesus is saying you got to feed more deeply. That spiritual depth is what gives the roots, once again, to stay with that image, to the rest of life, to give meaning to the rest of life. He's basically saying regularly give attention to your spiritual depth. Do not be tempted to stay at the physical level. And so it's really interesting. I'm not sure if my parents would have done it differently if our economic circumstances were different, but we never, ever once in our trips from, I would say, 1968 to 1983, annually going for Christmas down to Florida, down Interstate 75 from northwestern Ohio down to the midsection of Florida, and then finally going to the East Coast, we never stopped at Disney World. Not once. We went right by Orlando. We went straight to the beach. And I'm telling you, man, that fed my soul. There's something about being there. There's something about having the opportunity to just hear repeatedly sort of I was talking about listening to breath and listening to heart, but listening to the cycles of the earth and the pattern of the waves. There's something soothing about that somehow was enriching and fed something deep within me. It was an interesting story that I remember seeing years ago in the film Parenthood, Steve Martin film. You might know that film. It became the basis for the series. I know nothing about the series, except of it. But the film is amazing in a lot of ways. There's this one point in which the family that Steve Martin was the father in was just in so much turmoil in all different ways. One of his son was having real difficulty with a sense of self. He's this little boy, maybe 11, 12 years old, trying to play baseball, not doing that well, not always secure with his friends. Turns out they were going to be having a new baby, and this was a surprise to him, and he wasn't having a good time at work. That wasn't going well, so his life was in a spiral. And his grandmother happened to be living in the little community with them, and she just said to her one time, she said, when I was a youngster, and she just said this out of the blue, and it wasn't clear that she was even attached to what was going on in the dynamics at that point. When I was a youngster, I used to love to go to Coney Island and ride the Ferris wheel. Actually, it was the merry-go-round. But all it did was go round and round in circles. And after a while, it wasn't quite enough. What I liked were the roller coasters, the speed and the excitement, the ups and downs. That was the ride for me. And what was interesting is that this elderly woman was giving wisdom. Listen, yeah, you can have that life that's going all crazy and everything, and that can be a source of great joy, but it becomes a source of joy when you have a sense of peace within you. You can ride the roller coaster when there are things going on that you're tending within, when you have some sort of depth in order to be able to savor, in fact, the roller coaster. Jesus moves on from the bread to talking about reminding us that healthy depth, going deeper than bread, means being fed by the one who's the source of all reality, and that's Almighty God. So that's what's so wrong about this temptation of Satan, who says, listen, worship me and I'll give you the stuff away. The wealth that you seem to think you want. And the deal is in Scripture we get this great picture that Satan's simply this big parasite. Satan was the least original reality, is the least original reality, incapable of creativity, but really very capable of making a mess of things. And certainly a poor alternative to the creative force in the universe. When we gain worldly power by dealing with the devil, building our lives on values that undermine love and justice, our roots, selfishness, materialism, empty materialism, are feeble. They're just not able to feed lives of deep meaning. And so the weight of depth reminds us that we're creatures, not simply random beings, but that some creator was behind it all. Marvelous creations? Yeah, we're amazing. Let's just consider our bodies and our minds. But that amazing thing is God's doing, creating us. And so our sole allegiance is to God. We don't give our souls to something less than God. Not any earthly or diabolical power. I mean, this is nonsense. The way of depth reminds us what God allegiance means. As creatures, we know our power, our limits in our power. That is, our powerlessness about a lot of things. As creatures, we replace selfishness with self-awareness and self-knowledge. It's not as if we're not supposed to focus on self. We need to know ourselves. Really, really crucial. As creatures, we work to be generous to others because mighty God has made us recipients of generosity. I mean, it's all rooted in that stuff. And so it was very interesting to just reminding myself that years ago our daughter, and she had to be no more than like 6 years old, decided she didn't want a birthday party just to invite a bunch of kids over. She just wanted to go to the movie with a handful of her friends and have some cake afterwards. That was good enough. The flurry of stuff wasn't necessary. Friendship mattered. It's always mattered to her. What does it mean for us to look for the deeper things, to savor what God gives us, to be able to affirm that? It was interesting for me to read the story of this young man who went to a dance. He was on a cruise with his parents, and at some point in the cruise, this dance took place aboard ship. And the young man was confined to a wheelchair. He had an illness that confined him there. And this was something that initially made people who were at the dance a little bit uncomfortable. But then, this young woman came up to him and asked if he would like to dance. And he said, yes, he would. And after that, every single young woman in the room danced with this boy. What does it mean for us to go deeper? To think about that which God gives us that is so much deeper than what we sometimes limit ourselves to. And so we don't go for stuff that is beneath God, that's the center of our lives. We go to the real thing, root ourselves in this loving and justice-giving one. And then, realizing that, we go to that one for the relationship to God. We don't play around with that relationship. This thing of tempting Jesus finally to go to the pinnacle of the temple to jump off so that God would launch God's powers to save him was a real violation. It really defied the faithful order of this power relationship. We are not here to manipulate God. We're here to open ourselves up to the true depth, to be changed by God's relationship to us, to discover all the ways that we can embody love and justice. Again, it's true to ourselves. This is not playing a game or playing some sort of act, being someone who we are not. It's knowing ourselves well enough to fit our lives and choose those paths in our lives that embody love and justice in a way that's true to ourselves too. God has uniquely crafted us, each one of us, our peculiar ways. Some of us, I've been accused of this before, more peculiar than others, but unique ways to live out the life of love, the love and justice. And so Lent's this great time to ratchet up the intensity of our focus on this. Give this time to step back and say, yeah, this, I've always, I can think in my head, this is faithful, but really to strategize about this, to strengthen that inner connection that enables us to do really important work. And I think of that work that we've tinkered with a bit here that we need to follow more, and that is the work of listening to one another, of hearing one another, of building a community based on the integrity of everybody's contribution. Not one of us sort of wielding power over the other, but each of us bringing what great writers call our pools of meaning to the table so that we create a shared pool that's called community, and here it's called body of Christ. The days are getting longer, maybe even less snow, as unbelievable as that might seem. And it's a perfect time for us to recharge ourselves, to be radicals. Not the second best of the unrooted life, but the very best of the deep life. May we commit ourselves to that. Let's pray. We thank you, Almighty God, for the privilege of simply being here in the midst of this creation. And we thank you further for the opportunity to step back and the opportunity to nurture our souls and nurture our relationship with ourselves, with our sisters and brothers here, with strangers that we cannot imagine that we'll meet, but certainly deeply with you. Help us, strengthen us, make us fully yours. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Would you join us now? I believe it's time for the next song. How